Hello and welcome back to No Longer Legally Detained, the podcast about life after the psych ward. How do you navigate being an adult when you never expected to be one? Hello, I'm your host Hannah, and today is Thursday Thoughts, and I've decided that I want to share something that I'm grateful for at the beginning of every episode, and also maybe something that I've struggled with this week. I've been inspired by some of the kind of social media stuff I've been seeing recently, and I think as someone who has definitely been struggling, trying to find those small kind of little glimmers of hope, but also sharing the reality that not everything's perfect. So each week on a Thursday, I'm going to share something that I'm really grateful for, and then maybe also something that I've kind of struggled with or a challenge that I've had. It would be amazing if you also want to share any of yours in the comments or on our social media posts. It would be lovely to hear what everyone's kind of feeling grateful for, and also being there together for the tricky and challenging parts as well. I'm going to start with the kind of challenge that I've had this week, and then we can end on more of a positive gratitude moment. So I think this week I have definitely been struggling with just the overall overwhelming nature of life, and just like feeling like I have so much to do and kind of not being able to compartmentalize all of those things, and then feeling really, really overwhelmed. And I think that's probably something that a lot of people can relate to, like, you know, kind of you go through those periods of life where like it feels like everything's all happening all at once. And I've definitely been struggling with like that as a concept, and just like feeling really weighed down and kind of like also like alone and isolated and having to deal with that. And I guess what I've kind of done, and I think I'm going to do, you know, a whole episode on this, but is just reminding myself that there are people out there who want to help, and just reaching out and asking for people, you know, just to sit with you and help you detangle the mess in your head. And you don't need a qualification to be able to help someone do that, just by kind of being a sounding post. So yeah, and that kind of leads on to what I've been really grateful for, is actually the people in my life. I've had probably a month or so of feeling like, even though I've got amazing people, that kind of feeling of like being very alone and kind of overwhelmed, and just like feeling like I'm battling everything by myself, even though there are people, but not really allowing them to come in, or the fear that if I do let them in, they may leave, and that kind of hurts more. But I guess I'm grateful for the people who I do have in my life, and who are willing and wanting to be a part of my life, and like wanting me to be a part of theirs. Today is going to be, we're going to start off kind of my series of really looking at life after the psych ward, navigating adulthood when you never expected to be one. This first set of kind of podcast episodes on a Thursday are going to be very related to the kind of overall title and topic of the podcast. So they are going to be a bit more maybe serious, a bit more, you know, kind of heavier content. And as always, make sure you're looking after yourself. Don't, you know, listen if you think it could be triggering. I'm, you know, not thinking that I'm going to be talking about anything, you know, very like at all explicit. It's all going to be done in a positive and kind of a overcoming light. But obviously, as always, you know, your health and everything comes first. Also, to always the caveat that, you know, I am not a doctor, I'm not a professional, I'm not telling anyone what to do, I'm not giving advice, I don't have any qualifications or any, you know, say so in that. Like, let's be real, she's, you know, just a person, just a girl who had a tough time, and is just sharing my experiences. And if you relate, if you cherry pick, if you know, see something that I've done and you go and investigate it further, or get signposted, but yeah, this is not at all a one way of doing things. This isn't the right or the wrong way. This is just my experience, and with everything, it's really personal. So just wanted to start with that to begin with. So on to today's topic. Today we're going to talk about something really personal and honestly kind of raw. If you've ever spent any time in psychiatric inpatient hospital, you know that stepping out of those doors doesn't just mean re-entering the world. It means navigating a whole new reality. And if you went in as a child and then came out as an adult, or you spent a very long time institutionalized, the transition can feel even more surreal. I'm going to be honest here, this episode is for everyone who's experienced that, but specifically for those who've had a traumatic time in hospital and then had to piece their life back together with the kind of added shock thrown in, the discovering neurodivergence, or just learning more about yourself, and kind of whether that be from trauma and not necessarily having someone to go back to from the person before, but actually reestablishing your life from the beginning and kind of rebuilding, well, not rebuilding, just building kind of a sense of self. And the idea of that, like, the world has moved on without us, and it can feel like when we went in, we've missed a whole chunk of time, and it can feel like really unfamiliar and not sure like where our role is and what we're meant to do and where we're supposed to be now in this kind of new place. And it's tough and it's really confusing, but you're not alone, and it's just not spoken about. And it's definitely an aspect of recovery and kind of overcoming, severe enduring mental illness that isn't spoken about enough. So yeah, let's jump in and get into it. I'm very conscious about the kind of narrative and glamorization of inpatient units and mental health and all of those things. And there's so much nuance and so many kind of factors that involve kind of being admitted into hospital. And this is not what this podcast is about, and this is not what this episode is about. This is focusing on kind of the after effects once you come out. And so when you're in like a hospital, it's easy to feel like you're very much in a bubble. It's like a space where, as much as I, personally had many negative experiences, which again, not going to go into because not necessarily very helpful for this kind of thing, but it is a very controlled and predictable environment. You have routines, you have kind of this very much like surreal and like kind of not fake, but I can't think of a better word, kind of environment. And rightly or wrongly, there are a team of other people who are making the decisions and advocating for you and giving you the sense of safety, and kind of making like you have no real responsibility for yourself. And then when you come out into the real world, it's like you're hit. Not only have you kind of, before you went in, were probably quite poorly, you're like, then you've had all this time out. It can be really, really overwhelming. And I definitely felt that feeling of like stepping back into the world and feeling like there was loads of things suddenly on my shoulder. And the world doesn't just stop because you've been struggling. And not that we expect it to have done, but like people still have expectations of you, like family and friends and jobs and school and work. And like you've kind of had this time out, and whatever's happened kind of while you've been there, and you've just been trying to get through. But then when you come out, no one really explains or helps you kind of understand what to do next and how to navigate the kind of feeling. Like there's definitely I've always found like a lot of kind of excitement, like that moon phase of like getting out of hospital and being so pleased and like free. And then it kind of suddenly will hit you and dawn you that this is like, it's not just this like getting out and like, this is like real life, and it just carries on. And I think that's something that can be really difficult. The person that I was coming out of my 5-year admissions, even though like I'd been in and out during those times, was a very, very, very different person. And it can be really tricky when we talk about narratives in terms of like rediscovering yourself after being in hospital or that. And I think for someone who has complex PTSD, for me, it wasn't a rediscovery. It was literally like the beginning and starting right like from the start. And that's a very personal thing, and there is no right or wrong with that. There's no like recipe of how to do it. It just is kind of very personal. But I found that really tricky, and then added in the fact that then I was diagnosed as autistic, and it was like this other kind of space was opened up, and it like there was definitely a lot of questioning of my identity, questioning of who I was. I started the journey when I was still like young. I was a teenager, and I kind of came out in my early 20s. And like there's a lot of big changes that happened then anyway. And I kind of had those big changes, but behind a glass, locked away from kind of the rest of society, and like feeling like everybody else had moved on and everybody else had got the support to do those transitions. And I was now like having to do those transitions alone because I was like older, but I had like the mindset of someone who was younger because of what I'd been through. And it was like a really interesting, and that's not to say like that's a right or wrong mindset, that was just how I felt. And I think it definitely the complication of like having to discover something as like big as discovering like neurodivergence. And I think especially when there's a lot of internalized ableism, there's lots of societal misconceptions, it's like such a minefield of having to try and navigate. And then it's like, where do I fit in? What do I do? Like maybe my symptoms are under control, but the underlying feeling of like, what is, I'm still don't understand what I'm doing with this life. And I think that for me was why it took so many admissions, because I was very much focused on the like symptom control, and it was not the sustainable recovery. And I think that's kind of the bit that like I feel really passionately and strongly about when it comes to rehabilitation, like mental health, and like getting, it's about those everyday lifelong steps that allow someone to stay well. So let's chat emotional recovery, a roller coaster that you didn't sign up for. I think it's such an interesting topic when like I think about my time during inpatient stays, and kind of as much as I had, many negative experiences, it is a protective bubble. And whether that be about just kind of from the world, and we won't get into the details of like what happens in there, but you are definitely feeling very isolated. But in a strange way, it also becomes this like safe space. And as much as I felt so unsafe, it also became like not the easier option. I don't mean it like that, and I'm sure people who've been there would get what I mean. But it's like it's all I ever knew, all I've ever known, and therefore like it's familiar, and therefore the out of controlness makes you feel in control, if that makes sense. And like there is the routine, you just know what's going to happen. There is the predictability in the unpredictability, and there's the predictability in feeling rubbish, because there's never, when I found that like my fear became of feeling good because that could get worse, whereas when I was stuck in hospital it was all just rubbish, but I knew that it could never get, like I could never feel good and then that be taken away from me. Um, and so then the idea of stepping out of the door and like going back into the world, knowing that the world hasn't stopped, that everyone else has just carried on, that people around me have moved on with their lives, and that's not like in a bad way, like in a way that like everybody's kind of adjusting and getting on with life, and it feels like, oh my goodness, who am I? Where do I fit back into this kind of world, and where do I slot back in with my friends or my family? Or maybe I've lost a lot of people during this journey, and that could be like through choice or not through choice. And there's like all these different aspects that people, aren't necessarily aware of, that really kind of make such a difference. And it can be that question of like, I feel like everyone else has a place, and where's my place? Like, where do I go? Who am I? Like, who am I away from my identity of being someone who was poorly, or being someone who was sick, or being someone who was struggling? It's almost like waking up from a coma and realizing you're now in a completely different life, and a one that you never signed up for, a one where you feel completely behind everybody else. I think it can definitely be hard when you discover that the things that felt like wrong about you, those things that you kind of maybe even led you to being into hospital in the first place, were actually more than just mental health struggles, that they might be linked to something deeper and something that's just part of who you are, like neurodivergence, and that kind of journey of like identity when it comes to neurodivergence, like going through lots of different stages of almost like grief and discovery and anger and like frustration and like, oh my gosh, does this mean I'm broken? But no, it doesn't mean I'm broken. It's a neurotype, all of these things and all those questions that there isn't really a space to answer those, and like a space to kind of, or a way, or even any guidance, because obviously it's going to be individual for each person. But how do you navigate that? How do you work out what this is, all these confusing thoughts? For me, discovering my neurodivergence was like a massive, huge revelation. I'd always struggled in ways that I didn't understand, and I never felt like I fit in. I felt like I didn't have the rule book to like lie to society, but I didn't realize that there was an explanation for why. And I think also growing up with, trauma and things, you can feel so broken, and then it's like having this key, like something like a key to a door of like explanation and finding out that I'm neurodivergent. And like for me, it's ADHD, autism, but obviously there's loads of different kinds of neurodivergence. It's like was a massive relief, but also a completely mind bending experience. Like it explains so much, but in the same breath, it left even more questions than I had the answers for. It's easy to say, oh, you were in hospital and now you're out and the life's moved on, and you know you're feeling better, so let's just go. But like, let's be real, it's really not that simple. And especially going in like feeling like a child, feeling really confused and scared about the world, and still trying to make sense of everything and what's going on, and then you come out in the body of an adult, of the legal, like being over 18, but you've definitely felt like, I definitely, for me, felt like I'd missed out on so many years of growing up, and almost like been stuck in this permanent state of like arrested development. And it's hard to know what that even means, and like what does being an adult mean. And for me, like, I was so scared of becoming an adult. Like that was my biggest fear, because I didn't feel like I had the skills, or I didn't know how to be an adult. And then I'd kind of been locked away from society. And then I came out as an adult, but not even like as a fledgling adult, like as a not a fully fledged adult. Like, let's be real, we know like 22 is not a full adult, but you know what I mean. Like it felt like, oh my goodness, this is even like, this is all of my worst nightmares. And in the nicest possible way, the world doesn't care that you're just trying to figure it out. And that's not saying that people don't care, but like life is life. And there's this pressure to be responsible. There is needing to hold a job, to manage your finances, to like interact with other humans, and like just be normal in massive inverted commas. And when you've been so isolated and so out of touch, that's really hard. You add in having struggled with your mental health or mental illness, add in trauma, add in neurodivergence, and it can feel like this impossible like thing that we will never be able to navigate. And I think that is definitely why a lot of us get stuck in the system. And I think it's important that we look at this and we think, well, actually, what what is it about, especially people who get stuck in the system, what are services, or what are people not offering to allow them to kind of get over that hump. And I think it's the biggest challenge comes from at discharge, because you're now just like back into this kind of we're like starting from scratch, and like you've missed opportunities, or you feel just out of place. And it's like, how can we make sense of that? How can I feel less completely out of sync and even more like alienated and isolated? I would say one of the hardest parts of the transition is reestablishing relationships. As someone who has always struggled with relationships, now knowing that's kind of a very big part of being neurodivergent, that kind of trying to reconnect when you feel very disconnected from yourself can be really difficult. And it might be that friends and family don't understand. Maybe they do understand, but you've changed. They may not be able to see the difference in you. There could also be like the fear of worrying. Obviously looking after someone or loving someone who's been really poorly is like, it can be like a really scary experience. And so like, I think those all add into factors. And I definitely, the fact that like being in hospital will change you, and it can change you in a way that isn't necessarily easy to explain or even be able to explain in words. And even those who like fully do get it and understand, it doesn't mean that they can, really like relate to how you are now. And it's a journey. And I think for me, like, such a big thing of not knowing myself, so how can anyone else know me if I don't really know myself? And there's also that guilt, I think, that comes with like, you've almost like abandoned people that care for you. Or like, I know that I had a lot of guilt for what I maybe put people through during while being poorly. And like, it's such a difficult kind of line, because absolutely it wasn't a choice and I was unwell, and nothing I ever did or said was deliberate. But absolutely, as a kind and empathetic person, I can appreciate the challenge that put in the position, and how that would have felt to my loved ones. And like, absolutely, while the guilt will not help either party, it it's definitely something that I think to acknowledge, and to have, if possible, like for me, like having an open conversation about it later on down the line has been really helpful, to kind of so it doesn't feel like something that's kind of like the elephant in the room. But absolutely, it's a really tricky kind of line to navigate. And I think that kind of that idea of like there being this barrier between you and the world, and you're stuck on the other side trying to figure out how to be part of it again, kind of how to fit back in. It is literally like when you see those films, or like I think a film where like that man comes out of prison and he's like never doesn't know how to like use a credit card because he's like been in prison for like 20 years. And obviously like it's not as dramatic as that necessarily, although for some people they have been in a very long time, but it is like just adjusting to like being allowed to have things that you were not allowed to have in hospital. There's so many things that obviously for safety you can't have, and then it's like so bizarre being back out and just like having access to everything again. And I think when you add in neurodivergence, as I've said like multiple times, it just adds that additional layer of complexity. And suddenly the ways that you've always struggled, whether that be social interactions, emotional regulation, focusing, suddenly make more sense. But at the same time, it's almost like you are suddenly seeing the world through a different lens, a one that feels, again, further maybe from other people's. And then it's like, right, I've got to navigate all of these things while also kind of rebuild my life and like trying to do it alone. And it feels like, oh my goodness, there's just so many things. Beyond the emotional and social challenges, there are the practical hurdles to face, and they're really real. When you leave the hospital and re enter the world, you're suddenly having to manage adult things, things that you may not have had a chance to learn or experience during your time away or before, even. And things like suddenly feeling like you need to get a job if you've been out of work. It can be really daunting. It's daunting to find a job in any way. It can be really hard. And then also the fear of having to explain why there might be a gap on your CV, or afraid that your mental health history will follow you and like impact your ability to get a job. Obviously money is a massive problem, and like especially in this day and age, the cost of living crisis is, cost of living crisising. And managing money's a challenge as it is, when you add in kind of long-term illness, chronic illness, mental health problems, all of those things are really, really challenging. And then also that thing of living independently, and like you've gone from being like 24/7 around people all of the time. And even if you go back and like live with family or people, it's still not as intense as the vibes that go on the psych ward. And so it can feel like this just sudden, you go from like this overwhelming, all consuming noise to what almost feels like deathly silence. And that can be another thing that can definitely just physically like feel bizarre. And also like having to do the everyday tasks that, during being in hospital, you might not have been able not have done, whether that be for safety reasons or whatever. And then suddenly you're going back into a world where you have to do all of those tasks straight away. And I think that can be such another like challenge of like, it can feel so overwhelming when you first come out of hospital. Like, they often say this is only the beginning of your recovery, and it so is, and you're in such a fragile and like, vulnerable position. And then to feel like all of these like big things hitting onto you can like feel just so overwhelming. But it is not all negative, and this is not a hopeless situation. And so how do we move forward? How do we go from surviving to thriving? And I'll be totally honest, it is not an easy road, and there's definitely not a one size fits all solution. And if you have followed my journey, you will have known, and like, whether that be like if you're close to me, you're seeing it in a different way. But like, my life has been very up and down, even in my recovery journey. And the things that I have done to help me cope and keep going have changed and evolved as I have. But here are some of the few things that I've learned along the way that I wanted to share. Giving yourself grace and time. The biggest thing I have learned is that you will never have it figured out. It will never get to this point where it feels done, because actually that isn't how life works. And actually, I'm saying actually quite a lot right now, but some days it is literally just, keeping yourself safe. And that could be for a minute, could be for an hour, however long. And you give yourself like, I'm gonna do it for just for this minute. And then, right, I've done that minute, so I'm going to do 5 minutes. Now I'm going to do 10 minutes. And now I'm going to do 20 minutes. And like, those when it feels all consuming and all overwhelming and like existential crisis vibes, thinking of things in too bigger like contexts can be just too much. So having that time to just kind of go, right, I'm just going to today, all I'm going to do is just be in bed. And as long as I keep myself safe, which is not a just at all, and I completely appreciate that, but like that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a meal today. I'm going to wash my hair. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And slowly but surely rebuilding a kind of sense of purpose and a sense of life and being really kind to yourself. And it's such a frustrating thing because everybody says that, like, to be kind to yourself. And that's really annoying, but it is sadly quite true. So my second kind of thing that I've learned, which is kind of, I think the word's antithesis of what I've just said, which is like the opposing, but I don't know really. We'll see. Hopefully that was the right phrase, otherwise that's just a bit awkward, is kind of actually, like, as I said, like the opposite, but it's kind of being like forcing yourself to do things that feel uncomfortable. And that's not in a way that is like too far or overwhelming or like it, but also I've very much found that like you're never going to feel ready. It's always going to feel safer to go back until you've pushed through that next barrier. And for so long, I think my fear, which is so valid and so completely understandable, kept me sucked back into my illness. And one of the biggest things that I learned that kind of helped me overcome was to kind of have the, drop it and go attitude. Like, just go, well, let's just do it. What is the worst that could happen, or what is the best that could happen? Like, my mom's favorite phrase, she gave me a little thing when I moved out, was, what's the best that could happen? It's someone who's always thinking of the worst. And I remember like just being so terrified, and absolutely things went wrong and things were horrible at times and things were amazing. But if I hadn't made some of those initial steps, which felt like the most terrifying, all-consuming thing, and they felt also like they were so tiny that they wouldn't even make a difference, so why go through all of that pain for just a tiny little step that really felt irrelevant? But actually, those are the steps, those are the moments that when you look back, you can see that they are the beginnings of that catalyst for change. And like, I really wish I could go back to little Hannah and be like, make those steps sooner. The ill version of you, the hospital, all of that thing that felt like not the easier option, because it's not the easier option and it's a horrible, horrible thing. But when you're in so much pain, and so scared, but it really can. And like, ultimately, like, life can be so horrible and so, but I would rather be feeling that horribleness from trying than just having the horribleness anyway. And actually, through that horribleness, there is light. Light breaks through. And don't get me wrong, I'm not like, I'm not living every day, thinking, oh my goodness, oh, this is the best thing that's ever happened. Like, and of course we know that like life's an up and down struggle, but like just starting, because I would rather have some moments of goodness than none. And yes, does the highs mean that the lows hit lower? Initially, maybe, yeah. But now, although there are still many, many lows, the pain of falling isn't as far and it isn't as deep. And you know that it's going to come back again. Like, that there's going to be good moments again. So yeah, it's hard, but find that purpose, do something, take that scary step. Because really, really, there is so much life out there. The next big one that I speak a lot about is accepting your neurodivergence and like discovering what it means to you. And like, when I was first diagnosed, I've said this before, like when I was first diagnosed as autistic, I remember thinking, I really do not relate to this at all. And then feeling like, oh my goodness, I am further broken because I don't fit in like what everyone is saying is normal, inverted commas, but I also don't fit into this like autistic world either. And then, I also now have an ADHD diagnosis, and then like pathological demand avoidance as a profile to look, or pervasive drive for autonomy, which is kind of a better way of explaining it for me personally. It's then getting all of those labels, and it's like, it's not about being, not like being a food in a shop and being labeled all over. But for me, it's getting those labels. It's going, right, so these are the medical technical kind of labels that I have put upon me. What do those mean in a medical sense? What do they mean in a social sense? And kind of taking all of those bits of information and then going, well, then with all of that kind of as the thing, what does that then mean to me? What does that mean to Hannah? What does that mean in all of those contexts with all of my own nuances? What does that mean to me? And that was the biggest kind of acceptance of my who I was. And again, it's a journey. Everything's a journey. We never complete anything, which is really annoying as someone who loves a to-do list that can just tick it off and be like, pretend it's done. And that is, we have to learn in life that we can't just tick it off and can't be done. But looking at like, right, so yes, I am autistic and that has these characteristics and they are important. The diagnostic criteria are important. And then, even when you go a step further from that and like looking at like, well, how can the diagnostic criteria, vary in different people? And then all of that is very valid. And then, but the biggest thing for you as a person is working out, what do these things mean to me? What do I struggle with? How can I be really honest with the things that I'm amazing at, the things I'm not so good at, my own flaws? We all have flaws. And like, that's not saying that as an autistic person, I am broken, but all people have things that are less desirable or things that they're not good at. And for me, it was the biggest change came when I actually, for me, it was when I started my ADHD meds and a bit along down that line, it was almost as if I could just be so like transparent with myself. And with that, I was starting to discover who I was. And with that, like acceptance of your like neurodivergence. Don't get me wrong, I have moments like literally like the other day when I thought I could do all of these things and then I ended up crying on the floor of Clapham Junction train station. And it's like, Hannah, you have to remember that you are autistic and therefore you cannot do all of the same things that other people can do. And that's not to say that I'm not capable and not to say that I can't do everything I ever want, but I've got to think about, how I navigate that in a safe and way that works for me. And I think that was kind of the difference that I had of like accepting my neurodivergence was like, okay, I'm saying that I'm neurodivergent and I'm saying that means that that as an autistic person, we have to do things differently. And I'm also saying that we're completely capable and we should be allowed to do all of the things that, everybody else is allowed to do. But it's about reminding myself that yes, while all of those things are true, I have to do things in a different way. And just because I would absolutely allow somebody else to do that, I need to have the same kind of grace and gratitude for myself to go, you know what, you deserve to do it in a way that works for you. And you know that you're hardworking, you're putting the effort in, and you know that you will get the result, but you need to do it in a way that doesn't make you really, really poorly. I feel like that really nicely leads on to my next kind of fourth, maybe final. I might have a sneaky little fifth coming in there of like finding your people. And I may have completely butchered how many. I actually can't remember. That's classic ADHD there. But in finding your people, and I think realizing that you have changed anyway. We all change from who we are at school. We all change with things that we go through in our lives. And when we start to discover who we are, when we kind of, discover whether that be neurodivergence or like any other kind of factor, it's then going and surrounding ourselves with people who make us feel happy, who make us feel safe, who make us feel like we can be ourselves. And like, again, that's such a cliche kind of phrase. And that doesn't mean that every single person that you're going to surround yourself with, you can, fully unmask around. Like that's not going to be a thing. But it's about having those people that, people who serve you in your life in different ways, just in the same way as for different people, you will serve their lives in different ways. And kind of finding those communities that add different parts to your life and like not relying on just one person, because that's not realistic. And I think as neurodivergent people, when we can have that bit of that like black and white literal thinking, and like I have this thing that I often say to people when they're like, oh, I'm always here for you. And like I realized like that I took, not that I took that literally, but I kind of did. And I suppose like now I say to people, no, well, you you're there for me when you can be. And that's not in a like a selfish way, that's in just a normal way of life. Like no other person can be there for you 24/7. That is just not how it works. But and to put that pressure onto somebody else isn't fair. And also for yourself to like be relying on one person like is just not realistic or like healthy mindset. But it's about creating that whole support network, that whole community around you, of having spaces, groups, hobbies, communities, I don't know, online spaces that all serve you in different ways, but all kind of have a focus on a similar like vibe to who you are, but they can all serve you in many different ways. And like having those different spaces can be really, really helpful. And like ensuring that, you know, there may be people who, you know, don't align or fit, or you feel like, and actually it's okay to walk away. It's okay to say, actually, you know what, nothing against you, nothing against me, but we're just we're not vibing here, and you don't need everyone to like you. And as someone with rejection sensitive dysphoria, this pains me greatly, but we have to learn, when I'm still learning, still learning, to be able to be comfortable in people not liking you, and people have you being a villain in somebody else's story, or being viewed in a way that isn't how you would want to be viewed. And those who matter will understand and want to listen and be there. And those who don't, that's okay, because they've served maybe a purpose in the past, but times have changed. There's a different chapter, and that's all right. So yeah, I'm going to combine kind of my last thing that I've learned with the ending of this podcast. If you're in the middle of this transition now, I hope you know that you're not alone, that it's hard and it's confusing and it's painful and it's just so many things, but there is a way through, and it's one step at a time, and you will be able to not potentially maybe find your way back into the world, or for those who, you know, don't align with that, like I didn't myself, into a new space, into a new world, and into you as your authentic person who will be on a journey for the rest of their lives, who will make mistakes, who will do things wrong, but who will equally laugh and make someone else's day with a comment that you make, or a smile, or make an impact. And it's all there, it's all within your capabilities, and you can do it. I know how scary it feels. I know how daunting kind of this can be, the biggest, even harder than, you know, surviving what we've already survived. And it's those who've been there will kind of understand and get that. And my mom always used to, and still does, say to me that it feels really painful, that next step. It feels because you're getting over that, you're pushing your comfort like zone out that little bit further. And obviously there's a difference between like safety zone and comfort zone, and we should always be feeling safe, but we can push our comfort zone that bit. And actually it's only when we push our comfort zone that we then expand our life, expand our potential, and expand our ability to start thriving. And that is so, I can't like articulate how much I get it. And I don't know, there is nothing that anyone else can say to make you be able to, like, in obviously whatever capacity, like however that works for you. And I don't, like, for me it wasn't just one thing, there was lots of little bits, but and it was like, it's almost like, you know, jumping out of the burning building, you know it's going to be painful, but it is the only way to get to the other side. And it is so worth it when it's done. Like, it really is worth it. And it will be up and down, and it will be hard, but you are so strong and so powerful and so capable of what you want to achieve in life, and you will do it. Thank you so much for joining me, for coming back for this second episode of Thursday Thoughts. I am so grateful for everyone who has come and listened. If you've got to the end of this episode, that is amazing. Thank you so much. And if you could comment on the Instagram post a bird emoji this time, like the freedom of like the bird, of us like flying away from the chains that have tethered us to our past. And yeah, if you are feeling stuck or you feel like you need someone who gets it, reach out to people. There is always support. You deserve to find it. I'm creating a list of like signpost resources kind of in one place of ideas, but look out, charities, friends, family. There will be someone who wants to listen and wants to be there, and that this stuck feeling won't be there forever. So yeah. If this episode has resonated with you, or you think someone else might need to hear it, please do share it. Please subscribe to the podcast. Please rate, review, comment. Also follow the Instagram at NLLD, the podcast, or my own personal Instagram, Legally Detained. It helps so much more than you know. And until next time, please take care of yourself. You're doing the best you can. You're amazing, and that is more than enough.